And I want to ask each of you about the illustrations that really stood out for you. But I do love this one on the cover because it's so indicative of the story, since the letters are sent tied to a balloon. So for those of you who haven't read it, this cover illustration is beautiful, and Noah will show it to us, the original, I think, later. But can you both also tell us a little bit about the illustrations that stand out the most to each of you?
Yeah, Noah, would you like to respond first about the cover?
Yeah, hi guys. I'm Noah. First of all, thank you, Celeste, for the lovely things you said about me and Lexie and for hosting this event. Thank you, Carly, and everyone at the American Library in Paris. Um, so yeah, the American Library in Paris is so special to me because it was where I did my first book signing ever um, while I was living in Paris last year. Or I guess 2019 is now 2 years ago, which is a frightening thought. But yeah, this book, The Ship We Built, is so special to me. And I think it's a story that I really wish I had been able to read as a young trans kid growing up without really any representations like this in books. And I did bring the original art for the cover, which I can get out. It's pretty big. So this is a ink and watercolor illustration. I don't know how clearly you can see it, but the process for this was sort of a series of back and forth sketches and emails between myself and the publisher, where I like sketched out a lot of different concepts involving motifs from the book, like the relationship between Rowan and Sophie, the balloons that Rowan releases into the sky, the idea of a ship. There's like a tiny paper ship inside the balloon. And also things like the moon and the stars that reappear throughout the story, and these hills, which I tried to base on the setting in Michigan as like roughly as possible. So yeah, and you can sort of see, if I hold up the jacket, that the colors are pretty spot on. It printed basically exactly the way I painted it, which was cool. But I also wanted to talk about the interior illustrations because it was a process that was really different from any book I've ever worked on, in the sense that I am drawing these illustrations that are supposed to be drawn by a 10-year-old. So in order to do that, I had to kind of unlearn my regular process of drawing. And Lexie showed you the one of the couch, which I think is a really sweet example because it's Rowan using drawing and writing as this outlet to like celebrate something precious in his life, which he might not feel ready to share with people in his life yet. But I wanted to show a few others. This is Rowan's drawing of his future self. I think the way that Rowan uses art is really similar to the way that I used art as a kid, as like a vehicle for imagining the life you wanted to live, and a sort of like escapism, and a way to like withdraw, not only withdraw from the world around him, but to create an inner world which he feels safe in. This is his drawing of Sophie. So in order to create these drawings, I had to go through like several stages where actually the first set of illustrations that I sent in were rejected because they didn't look like a 10-year-old drew them. And I had to try some new techniques, I actually ended up doing the final art on like big kid paper with crayons. And that was like the way that I finally was able to like loosen up and draw in a way that Rowan would. I don't know if I answered the question. I actually forgot what the question was, but
I think you showed us some of your most touching illustrations, the ones that really stood out for you, but we didn't hear about that from Lexie. Lexie, do you want
yes.
to tell us yours?
Sure. Yeah, a few of them. And I actually have, so as a gift, Noah gave me the original drawings of all of the internal ones. I have one of them right behind me. I'm not sure how well you'll see it because it's about 8 o'clock in the morning in New York. But okay. Yeah, so I have them framed around my house, which is both an indication of favoritism, but also some of them give me warm feelings. And some of my other favorite drawings that Noah did or Rowan did don't give me warm feelings. They come from a place of fear or loss, or him needing to hang on to something. So I won't go into too much detail about this particular drawing, but Noah and I have had some interesting conversations about this particular illustration. So Rowan has an abusive home life, and that's part of his reason he not only does each chapter in the form of a letter, but also elevates the reason why these illustrations even exist, and that he needs to work so hard to imagine a different future or create his own present reality through image making. But anyways, this is one that I'm sure Noah could say a lot more about. But this is a map that Rowan makes for him to describe his process of going through his home without both of his parents seeing him, and him getting to a place that he loves within his house, which is behind a Christmas tree. And you'll see in the drawing that his parents' faces are scribbled out. That's yeah, to me, one of the most important illustrations in the book, because he so deeply wants someone to understand him. And I think the role of a survivor of abuse often is someone who deeply wants to be understood and may not have the words for it. So, so that's one. Before I say more, would you like to add on to that, Noah? Because I know you had a lot of thoughts about that in particular.
Yeah, this was definitely the hardest illustration to do. And like Lexie and I talked about it a lot going back and forth because it depicts something that's so sensitive, and because it visualizes something that Rowan isn't really able to put into words. But it's on page 134 for anyone who has the book. And yeah, it's sort of a map of his house with his father sleeping in his bed, and his mother sort of ignoring him in the kitchen, and both of their faces are crossed out, which is really the strongest indication. Like the scribbled out faces to me is the strongest indication of the abuse. And yeah, this was like, I think Rowan uses art as a way to express things that he can't verbalize or like can't say out loud, as well as a way to imagine a better future for himself. And that's sort of like, I think that's sort of the role that art plays for me as well as for a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah. The another illustration that I love, I think is probably one that doesn't get referenced as much, I think, as it should, but I'll read the section around it and then show it to you. It's on page 12. Okay. I mentioned my last letter that I would share a secret, so here it goes. It's a really good drawing secret. My go-to doodles are jellyfish and wheels of Swiss cheese. They might seem really different from each other, but in drawing them, they actually look exactly the same. The only real difference is that one of them has arms that reach into the water and the other one stays a circle. And here's that drawing. Oh gosh. Oh, there it is. Okay. And I'm like, I'm obsessed with that drawing because so a lot of this book is actually true to my lived experiences. And that's one example in this book where my go-to doodles when I was Rowan's age were Swiss cheese, drawn pretty much just like that, and a jellyfish. And it's kind of a metaphor for gender, actually, where it's like Rowan's like, people make a big deal about how different these two things are, but they're actually the same. And I feel similarly to assigned gender of like there's a lot of similarities, and we live in a society where the differences are so what's the word, prodded, poked at, and overly examined to the point where we miss a lot, and more harm can be caused. So I love that one. And then also another obvious one is the front cover, and Noah already spoke to the cover, but I'll say a little bit too. Something that was really, really important to me on the cover was that no faces were shown, because I didn't want, especially young readers, but actually readers of any age, to be like, oh, I don't look like that, so therefore I'm not in this. And so I wanted to do something that was a little bit more interpretive. So Noah did hands on the bottom as the only representation of what a body is. Something more abstract. And I guess especially because of the letter writing format, but also because of the theme of loneliness, I didn't want to prescribe what anyone looks like. And I think even in the context of transness too, there's a lot of assumptions of what a trans person looks like. And I think especially for for anyone on the transitioning internally or externally experience, there's a really intense gaze that happens. And so kind of removing that and just making it about the themes was important to me. I was really excited about the choice of watercolors as something that's more dreamy and soft, because Rowan often lives in a world between reality and what he's imagining as a survival mechanism. And I think one other thing that I've been really excited to share about the illustration process and my correspondence with Noah as we were putting this together is that when I gave notes about what illustrations I wanted done, I also included in parentheses how much time I thought Rowan would spend on each drawing as a guideline for Noah. I would love to hear more about how you interpreted that information. So I'll just give an example. So the picture that Noah shared of Rowan experiencing his future. Oh, I don't even know what it is. But it was just a lot more detailed. Or I'll share this one. So here's another like very detailed drawing. This is a happy imagined moment of Rowan in the car with his mom driving somewhere new. And because of the levity that it has, it's on page 256 for anyone who wants to know. But because of the levity it has, he would probably spend a long time on it because it would serve as a form of meditation. So I think I put maybe something like 30 or 40 minutes for this one. Where the jellyfish one that I just showed you a few minutes ago, thanks for showing it, Celeste. The one I showed you a few minutes ago, that took him, I think, like a minute because it's a doodle. Or like another example of, so this is a drawing Rowan does of himself in the beginning because, oh my God, I'm trying to get the lighting right. Okay, there we go. This one was also a very fast one, I think maybe 5 minutes, because this drawing kind of brings up pain for Rowan. It's a drawing of himself, and he doesn't resonate with the way that he is presenting to the world, especially in terms of his haircut. So he does a quick drawing of himself without his head because he doesn't want that to be represented or remembered in that moment. So yeah, so each drawing basically received a note of how long he would have spent on it, partially based off of what feeling he was trying to get out or what feeling he was trying to escape. And yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Noah.
And can you both speak to a little more about how you found each other? Because I think anyone familiar with children's books and publishing in general probably knows that most authors and illustrators don't get to work together the way you two have. And it sounds as if you had such an organic collaboration, just like your discussion now, and some similar thoughts. And the illustrations really bring so much to the story about a character who loves drawing. So it's wonderful that you could work together. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that happened, how you found each other, and then continue with the other questions Lexie had for you, Noah?
Yeah. Well, well, actually, can I say this? I think I'm going to. The publisher actually did not want us to communicate to the extent that we did. We kind of because usually editors prefer to mediate communication between authors and illustrators. And our collaboration started in a traditional way in that I was contacted by an editor, not by Lexie. And the editor asked me if I was interested in doing the book, and they sent me a draft of it along with some concepts that they had put together for what the art would look like. And I was reading it and I was like, oh my God, this is really good. And it really resonated with me as a non-binary trans boy. And it reminded me of growing up and using art to process my feelings around gender, and around sort of creating an alternate world for myself. And so I tracked Lexie down on the internet and I contacted them directly. And I was like, hey, I think I'm illustrating your book. And I really want to talk to you about it because this book is great and it means a lot to you. And I want to do it justice, which is not actually what I was supposed to do. Traditionally, the editor works as this intermediate middleman between the illustrator and the author, and the publisher structures it like that. I think to avoid conflict, or to just expedite the process, I guess, because the less communication there is, the less chance there is for disagreements, which would slow down the publication of the book. But I really wanted to talk to Lexie because I was like, this book is so special. And this was the fourth book I had illustrated, with all four books being about gender and featuring trans protagonists. But out of those four books, this was the only book which was actually written by a trans author. So being able to collaborate with another trans creator on a project was really special to me as well. And that was another reason why this book stood out to me, because it really felt like Lexie was telling her own story through through the vehicle of this novel. And yeah, so I ended up, this was actually about a year ago, actually exactly, this was February 2020, before before the world shut down. I was in New York for an illustration conference for the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators like annual conference, and I knew that Lexie lived there, so I messaged them and I was like, hey, I'm gonna be in New York, we should meet up. So we actually got to hang out, and we hung out in this writer's beautiful apartment. And I got to give them some of the book, and it was really special. Yeah. But I have not had that experience with any other writers who I've worked with. So this has been really special for me. Do you want to say how this looked like on your end? Because you were like, I don't know how the publishing process worked for you, like how long it took for you to get your script accepted by a publisher.
The whole publishing story, I think, is pretty interesting. But I'll first respond to the overall question of yeah, getting to how we met and collaborating with you. I understand why it's the norm for like illustrators and authors not to connect for all the reasons Noah said, but again, because it was something so personal that I was really excited to make it a personal process. I don't really know how to speak to the book in an abstract way, or even in a removed way. And something I really appreciate from the publisher is that they that they went out their way to make sure that I was working with a trans illustrator on this. That they really honored my vision for the illustrations in a way that I've heard other authors talk about in a completely different way. I feel like they did make some more flexibility for me, partially because of the sensitivity of this particular text, and because it is the first of something. And so, of course, wanting it to be done well. Yeah, I'm really grateful that this is my first novel, and it's been such a wonderful collaboration in terms of the illustration process, and also Noah taking my feedback like in a serious way, because they already referenced this, but when I received the first illustrations, I was like, these are good, but no. But no, because they looked too much like a professional illustrator made them. And it was so important to me that they, even if it was a very talented 10-year-old, like I still wanted them to look like a 10-year-old drawing, because yeah, for a lot of reasons, but I think the biggest one is to treat Rowan's words as real as possible, and to not have a moment of him not being believed, which is something that trans youth, but I think all LGBTQ youth, and also to another degree, like all youth in general, struggle with, is the struggle to be believed, because people so often undermine their really big and important thoughts and aspirations. So yeah, so it's very important to me. And in terms of like my publishing process, I think in the context of this event, the most important thing to say is actually when I wrote the very, very first version of the book, I mentioned it was a gift for someone. Right after that version, I thought maybe I wanted it to be a picture book. And so to me, it was always going to be something that was going to be illustrated, even if it became a chapter book. I knew that illustrations were important because of the imaginative quality of it, but also for someone who has kind of a weird relationship with photographs, having the autonomy and power to make your own photograph through drawing, even if it's something that no one else witnessed, if it's something that maybe never happened, there's power in choosing to remember it and preserve it. So yeah, so I always knew it was going to be a picture book. The very first versions, I wasn't out yet as trans, and neither was the main character. It was kind of a journey we had together. So the very first version was more of like a queer lesbian sort of, even actually bisexual story. And so it's been really cool to see how it's changed. But the things that have stayed the same are key too, which is the choice to make it a visual experience.
There's a question in the chat. Do you have any earlier drafts of the illustrations that you could show us?
Oh gosh, I don't know where they went. I would have to like dig in my computer to find them. But basically, they looked more professional, for lack of a better word. They looked more clean, and there wasn't the same messiness. Like, this is an illustration I really love. And this is an illustration of Rowan meeting a person at a grocery store who appears to be queer, and Rowan, or it was a gas station, and Rowan like identifies with this person because it's the first like outwardly gender variant person who he comes in contact with. And it's messy, like, but the earlier version of this illustration would have looked like much cleaner, much like more realistic proportions, no like scribbles or smiley faces. And I had to sort of like, I had to start over and say like, I am just gonna have fun with this, because when kids approach art, they're usually not like viewing it as work, they're just viewing it as play. And that was like a mental change that I had to make for myself. But let me look and see. Let me take a minute and look, and maybe at the end I will pop back in with some early drafts of illustrations.
Yeah, and one other big difference too, is that the earlier drafts had like thick, bold lines in the way that you see in a lot of picture books or cartoons, where the final versions, it was more gray. Or you mentioned that you used crayon. Ultimately, it wasn't like yeah, like yeah. But that seemed to make a big difference too, of just how color was used even.
Yeah, I had to use crayon in the end because I realized that I had to use like a drawing implement that I couldn't erase. Because if I could erase it, then I would like go back and make all these corrections, which then made it look like an adult had drawn it. Um, so, and I even tried, I was like, should I try to draw these with my left hand? I ended up not doing that because it stressed me out too much. But yeah.
If you want to take a minute to look, I'm sure we'd all be very happy to see some of those. We have some other questions in the chat here. So there's one. I'm sorry to ask, but I'm confused. Do you feel like a boy or like a girl, Lexie?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I identify with boyishness, but I also identify with femininity, and I don't think that those are contrasts that in the way that society presents them to be. Yeah, so in some way I feel like combination. I think a lot of people are naturally the combination of things, but society makes a lot of rules about what is possible for people in their own explorations and identities. But the shorter answer is more boyish, but also feminine. And also playful, and also words that can't be, that aren't as obvious as boy or girl. I don't know. Sometimes I think of my gender as a roller skate, or I don't know, like a flower, or like uh, things that don't necessarily have a clear boy definition or a clear girl definition.
And following up on that, there's another question that for you, Lexie, do you think that the publishing world is sincerely more open to the types of stories you want to write, or do they look at you as just the flavor of the month?
It's a really good question. I would say that's one of my fears. One of my fears is being a flavor of the month. That is a really good description. I think yeah, for some people in the industry or in the world, I am the flavor of the month. And for people who don't maybe understand what that means a phase or a fad or something that's just like interesting to culture right now, but people will forget about soon. And ultimately, those people aren't really my audience, anyways. So I try not to think about that too much. Because, and so many people have said this before me, but yeah, trans people have always been here. Queer people have always been here. They exist globally, not just in the US, not just in New York. And that's one of the reasons why I have it in Michigan, in a part of Michigan that a lot of people don't think these people even exist in. And I also think queer and trans people exist even when they don't have the language for it, or they have different language for it. And the ways that we define it here in the US, for example, is not universal. So yeah, and I also think that this particular book, and this isn't true for a lot of books that deal with trans issues, it's about a lot of things. It's not just about gender or sexuality. It's about loneliness, it's about incarceration. And for people who don't know, incarceration is ideas of justice and who goes to jail and who doesn't. It's about survival. It's about loneliness. It's about faith. It's about family and learning about yourself, and what changes and what doesn't change. So, yeah, I think I think it's important to tell trans stories, of course. I also think it's even more important to write complex trans stories that aren't just about I went from this to this, and making it so simplified to the point where sometimes I fear it does more harm than good, because people, and especially kids' experiences, are not simple. So I hope I responded to that.
Yeah, thank you. There's another one here. We have 2 more questions in the chat, and then maybe time for one more. I know it's very early for you. So again, thanks for being here. And thanks for answering all of these questions. Someone does want to know, do you think about translating this book to other languages?
I personally do, and I think about it all the time. Unfortunately, it's not really in my control. I wish it was. It's something that has to be dealt with through like the publishing world, and I'm not totally sure how that process works. I think it's something that might happen, but I just haven't been told anything about it yet. I will also say, related to this, that I've been working on a screenplay version of this, so a movie version, and I fantasize that when the movie version eventually gets made, maybe more translations will happen with that, because of the world that we live in, people tend to pay more attention to movies than books, and that's frustrating. but I'm hoping that it'll happen, whether it's soon, whether it's after the film comes out, or if it's something that happens in a more underground sense. I don't know. Yeah.
And another question here from the chat. What has it felt like to have a personal story out in the world, and what have the responses been like from the people in your life?
It's been mixed. Yeah, I'm not going to romanticize it. I think overall it's been an immense gift, and I'm very thankful. I also know that what I have written has scared people from my life, confused people from my life, and the people who it's scared and confused the most do not talk to me about it, and sometimes that's really painful, actually. And the people who may be most scared and confused about it make it more about like, I published something with a big publisher, and do not talk about what it's about. And that's also painful, because to a degree, it doesn't matter who I published it with. Like, it matters that I made it to begin with. And I feel like that should be the thing that's elevated, not the I don't know, stereotypical ideas of success parts of it. Yeah, and overall, I have felt good about the process. I think the day that I was actually the most scared was the day before it came out, and the day it came out. Yeah, because it felt like, okay, I can't take it back. And also because, I mean, there are controversial things in this text, and I was especially warned not to mix stories of abuse with stories of gender. And I had to fight hard for that. So, but a lot of people don't want to hear that. A lot of people don't want to hear the complications of it. So it's been interesting. It's like the short answer.
And there's a comment here for both of you, Lexie and Noah. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. I second that. And the person says, thank you, Noah. I'm so glad you reached out to Lexie. It made for an even more special book. And then I think we'll have our last question, which comes again from the chat, and it's for Noah. When you were in Paris, did you like some of the art over here that inspired you? And did you have a favorite artist?
Oh my God. I loved being in Paris. Also, before I answer this question, I did find some early sketches from the process of illustrating the book, so I could share them. I'll respond to the question first, though. Yeah, I lived in Paris for just 6 months. I hoped it would be longer, um, during which my ex was working at the American Embassy. And so I was in this position where I was able to just like, because I'm a freelance illustrator, I work from home, and I don't meet up with publishers or writers in real life. Generally, I just like sit in my apartment and draw, and then I send the art in, and then I get paid. So I had the choice of whether I wanted to stay in Boston and do that, or whether I wanted to travel to France with my partner and do it from there. So obviously I went to France. And I loved being in Paris. It was also, my dad was born in Paris before moving to the US as a small child. Shout out to Dad. Thanks for coming. Thanks for waking up early to see our conversation. So it was cool to live somewhere where I had some family history. Um, and I think my favorite thing about France, I got to go to Livre Paris, the book festival. And that was just like a beautiful experience for me because I got to see books, illustrated picture books that were breaking the bounds of conventional format and that were printed on like transparent paper, or illustrated books that were intended for adults, like not being confined to the expectation of an illustrated book being for children. And just seeing books that were like produced in such a beautiful way, where they clearly like had a higher budget than like American picture books usually have. And not even just budget, but just in terms of like being open to experimental books and like being open to books that like break traditional formats. But my favorite, I have lots of favorite artists. I don't think I have time to list them all. But my favorite book that I've read recently is, and it's for a similar age range as The Ship We Built. My favorite book that I read recently, which came out this year, is The Magic Fish by Trung Ly. It's a graphic novel. He is a immensely talented queer Vietnamese American graphic novelist. And it's the story of this kid who's sort of based on his younger self, who wants to come out to his parents, but he doesn't know how to because he doesn't have the words in Vietnamese. And it's really beautiful. I highly recommend it. I think Trung Ly is my favorite artist right now. Yeah, and I guess I could share. Oh, I also wanted to touch on the flavor of the month comment because as I mentioned before, I've illustrated 4 books. They have all been focused and centered around trans characters. And all 4 of those books have been published in June because June is Pride Month. And and publishers like to publish queer and trans books during Pride Month because it like boosts the sales. And there's like bookstores do Pride Month displays. So the idea is that if the book comes out in June, it'll sell better. But also it makes me sad because queer and trans stories are important year round. And actually, because I worked on 2 books that were put out in 2020, and they were both published in June, The Ship We Built was published like 2 weeks after a different book I illustrated called The Everybody Book. And because they were both published in June, it was like I didn't really have time to like properly celebrate either of them because they were just like back to back. And yeah, I would like to see publishers prioritizing queer and trans stories in like the other 11 months of the year too.
Yeah, I didn't make that connection until you said that, but it's nice that the ship rebuilt came out in May. Like
Oh, right, it did.
But yeah, that's interesting to think about.
I forgot that it came out in May. This, I mean, 2020 was a blur. It's all blurred together in my mind. But that's actually great that they didn't publish it in June.
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
Worked on has been.
It's a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
Little higher up.
I don't know if I can screen share to show you guys some of these sketches. I didn't find the early versions of the interior art, but I did find some concept sketches I did for the cover. Let me see, share screen. Is it working?
Yeah.
Can you see my screen? Okay, cool. So this was the first sketch I did for the cover. It says ugly first draft, ew. And this was, I didn't get a lot of direction here. They were like, we want the cover to include a hill and balloons and a boat and Rowan and Sophie holding the balloons. So, and there's like letters attached to the balloons as well. This is kind of a mess.
And Noah, I imagine, had you already read the book at that point?
I had read the whole draft and I was like, oh, this is great. But it took me a while to like arrive at, and the publisher didn't communicate to me that Lexie like didn't want to see faces on the cover. So most of these sketches do include like vision, like depictions of the kids. So this was the second idea, which I think looks a little bit too like action adventure. But these kids are like riding a boat, hair flowing in the wind, balloons and clouds in the sky. I like this drawing, but I don't think it makes sense for the cover of the book. This was the third idea, which is super silly, but they're sitting in a cardboard box, which is something that they do in the story. And they're pretending that the box is a ship. And Rowan has some like binoculars made out of toilet paper rolls or something. And Sophie has some goggles on. And the box is like covered in their drawings. This is also too silly, I think. And then, as you can see, the idea that we actually went with was like this little tiny rough sketch that I did. It was like the fifth sketch where I was like, oh, I'm out of ideas, but maybe this would look cool. And it turned out being the one that was chosen. So I guess that's the moral of that story, is that you never know which ideas are going to be good until you like get them all out. But I have a little bit more art to show. Yeah, so once we chose that direction, I made a bunch of color comps. And a comp is sort of like a rough version of an illustration. So I actually I drew it in watercolor and like experimented with different painting styles and different like color combinations and splotches. I also had this other idea where the kids are like floating in the balloon. Decided not to go with that one because they kind of look like they're dead. So there's like several versions of that as well. I won't show you all these files because they're mostly the same. But the one that we chose, after submitting like 10 different color variations, we ended up choosing this one with the black background and the yellow balloon. because the yellow of the balloon against the black night sky really pops, and it resembles like the moon and the stars. And yeah, so I illustrated this digitally before even starting. And once I had like made all these different digital versions, I cut this giant piece of Bristol board and illustrated it with ink and watercolor. Yeah, I think I do have a few interior sketches. Here we go. I didn't keep the old versions, but you can see here, this is a folder of the interior art, including several different versions of different illustrations. Like I made 3 different versions of Rowan's face, Rowan's self-portrait, because I wasn't sure what Lexie wanted Rowan to look like exactly. So I made these 3 different drawings, and I was like, Lexie, you should choose the one that you think most resembles this character. And since some of the drawings were so scribbly and quick, I made different versions of them just because I was like, this is something that Rowan like drew in 30 seconds. So I wanna make sure that it's like the right mood. I don't know. Yeah, that's a little behind the scenes.
That's so cool. It's wonderful to see those, and I am so excited that we get to see your process and the process of how you work together. It's been really fascinating listening to you talk about your work together and your work individually and just your creative process and your lives. I could talk with you all afternoon, I think. But I do want to thank you for being here. I know it's early and you might want to go have breakfast or go write or draw. So thank you so much for being here. Bravo to you for this wonderful book. Library members, you can pick up a copy to borrow here. You can ask your local bookshop to purchase a copy. You can also check out It Feels Good to Be Yourself here at the library and The Magic Fish, which Noah talked about, if you are curious about those. I hope that we can welcome you both here in person one day soon when you're allowed to travel. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.